My pastor was evil and he destroyed my life. He lied to me, saying that God told him my late husband's spirit was haunting me. He said the only way to be free was to burn all my husband's belongings and transfer my late husband's military pension into the church account. I obeyed because I trusted him in my grief and pain. But it was all a lie. He only wanted the money. My pastor later transferred my late husband's military pension from the church account to his own personal account. When I found out, I began to plan my revenge on how to expose him and destroy him. Keep watching to find out how I got my revenge. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. The story I'm about to share taught me the hardest lesson of my life about trust, faith, and how evil predators disguise themselves as modern-day pastors. But for you to get the full gist of this story, allow me to take you back to where it all began. My name is Nethera, and I'm 72 years old. 4 months before I fell in the evil hands of a cruel pastor in my local church, I had just buried my husband James in Montgomery, Alabama. James had been my anchor for 41 years of marriage, a decorated military officer with gentle hands and a heart that could fix anything broken in our world. We raised 2 sons together, both now serving overseas in military service, following in their father's proud footsteps. When James passed peacefully in his sleep, I thought the worst pain was finally over. But I was completely wrong about that assumption. I woke up every single morning feeling lonely. Our quiet neighborhood felt too empty without his presence. The church became my only refuge from grief, and I found myself depending heavily on our young pastor, Elric Danner. He was barely in his 50s, with kind eyes and a warm smile that seemed to understand my deepest pain. Pastor Danner had joined our congregation just 2 years before James died, and every church member seemed to love him completely. He had this special way of making you feel like the most important person in any room. When he spoke from the pulpit each Sunday, his words seemed to flow directly from heaven straight to your heart. This terrible story of mine began when I started having dreams about James, my late husband, almost every night after his funeral service. These dreams were beautiful and peaceful, where he would smile at me lovingly but never speak a single word. At first, these dreams brought me incredible comfort during my darkest hours. I would wake up feeling like James had actually visited me from heaven, like somehow our deep connection remained strong even after his death. But the dreams became persistent, so I thought it would be nice to discuss it with Pastor Danner in a private counseling session at the church office. During the counseling session, I mentioned these wonderful dreams to Pastor Danner. I expected him to tell me they were a precious gift from God above, a beautiful way for James to let me know he was finally at peace. Instead, Pastor Danner's expression grew serious and deeply concerned about what I had shared. Pastor Danner explained that James's spirit was actually restless and tormenting me through those seemingly peaceful dreams every night. He claimed God had personally revealed to him that my soul was dangerously tied to my husband's memory and physical possessions. Unless I completely severed those spiritual ties immediately, Pastor Danner warned me that those peaceful dreams would soon transform to a dangerous form of spiritual unrest for me, and would grow much worse over time. The way he explained this made me scared to my feet. This man who had comforted me through my absolute darkest hours was now telling me that my beautiful memories of James were actually spiritual poison destroying my soul. I trusted him with every fiber of my being. Why wouldn't a grieving widow trust her pastor? He was supposedly a man of God, and I was just a lost widow who felt completely helpless, without her husband's steady guidance through life. Pastor Danner told me that the strongest spiritual bonds I held were to physical reminders of James throughout our home. Every photograph we had taken together, every love letter he had written, every military medal and piece of his uniform carried dangerous spiritual weight that was actively preventing my healing process from God. He said God specifically required me to burn every single item that reminded me of James. I didn't know it at that moment, but those words marked the exact beginning of my complete destruction. Looking back now, I realized that was the precise moment I should have walked away and never returned to his office again. The next Sunday afternoon, I returned home from church with Pastor Danner's instructions ringing loudly in my ears like alarm bells. I walked through every room of our house, gathering everything that reminded me of my beloved James. His Purple Heart and Bronze Star medals that he nearly died earning overseas. The love letters he wrote me during his long military deployments abroad. His pressed military uniform that still carried the faint scent of his favorite cologne. I also collected our wedding photographs and vacation pictures that spanned our entire 41 years of marriage together. I built a fire in our backyard and watched 4 decades of precious memories turn to gray ash. With each item I threw into those dancing flames, I felt like I was deliberately erasing a piece of my own heart. But Pastor Danner had convinced me completely that this painful sacrifice was absolutely necessary for my spiritual healing process to begin. When I called Pastor Danner that evening to report that I had completed this heartbreaking task, he praised me for my extraordinary faith and obedience to God. He said God was extremely pleased with my difficult sacrifice, and that healing would surely follow. But burning those precious memories wasn't nearly enough for Pastor Danner's ultimate plan. Pastor Danner called me the following week to schedule another private counseling session at his church office. When I arrived at the appointed time, he seemed different somehow than before, more intense in his focus, more concentrated on me in a way that made me feel both special and strangely uncomfortable. He asked me detailed questions about how I felt after destroying all of James's cherished belongings. I told him honestly that I felt completely empty inside, like I had deliberately cut away vital pieces of my own soul. Pastor Danner nodded knowingly and explained that this terrible emptiness was actually spiritual cleansing, beginning to work effectively. But then he said something that completely devastated me. He told me that burning the physical items was only the very first step in this process. The strongest bond I still maintained to James was actually financial in nature. His military pension that deposited automatically into our joint bank account every single month. Pastor Danner explained carefully that as long as my soul continued to feed spiritually from that money, my spirit would never be truly cleansed from worldly attachments. He said God had specifically shown him that I needed to transfer those monthly pension payments into his personal bank account for safekeeping while I underwent complete spiritual healing. I didn't know it then, but this was the exact moment I should have stood up and walked away forever. Instead, I found myself nodding along as he explained precisely how this financial arrangement would work. Pastor Danner would receive James's pension payments and use them for God's important work while protecting my soul from the spiritual contamination of worldly wealth. He specifically told me to avoid telling anyone who might discourage me from this process. He explained that people often don't understand how God works. The way he spoke about this arrangement made it sound so reasonable and biblical. He quoted scriptures about storing treasures in heaven rather than on earth. He reminded me that Jesus himself had told the rich young ruler to give away all his possessions. Within just a few days, I had signed all the paperwork to redirect James's pension payments to Pastor Danner's personal account. That monthly income had been my only financial security for the future, but I convinced myself that God would provide for my needs in other miraculous ways. At first, Pastor Danner checked on me regularly and seemed genuinely concerned about my well-being. He would call to ask how I was feeling spiritually, whether the dreams about James had finally stopped. For several weeks, I actually did feel different inside, lighter somehow, like I was finally beginning to heal from my overwhelming grief. But then Pastor Danner told me about the final step in my spiritual cleansing process. He explained that the house James and I had shared for decades still held too many memories and too many spiritual ties to my past life. He said God had revealed that I needed to sell our family house and donate all the proceeds to the church. Only then would I be completely free from the bonds that were preventing my spiritual growth. I didn't know it then, but I was about to lose absolutely everything I had left in this world. I sold our family home within a month and gave Pastor Danner every single cent from the sale. I didn't discuss this with any of my sons before making this decision, because I knew they wouldn't let me do it. Nearly $200,000, representing everything James and I had built together over 4 decades of marriage. I moved into a small apartment across town, using my last personal savings for the deposit. Within 3 months, my situation became desperate beyond anything I had ever experienced before. My sons would call to check on me, but I always told them I was okay because I didn't want them to suspect anything. I believed that God would soon replace everything I had given away, twice as much. But to my shock, my personal savings dwindled to almost nothing while I survived on generic cereal and canned soup. I called Pastor Danner repeatedly, leaving dozens of messages about my financial struggles, but Pastor Danner never returned a single one of my calls. One morning, driven by hunger and desperation, I decided to walk to Pastor Danner's office to plead with him face to face. Just as I reached for his door handle, I heard voices coming from inside his office. Pastor Danner was teaching another pastor how to manipulate elderly church members, using the exact same tactics he had used on me. I heard him say that old people believe nonsense about dreams and spiritual messages. He explained how to convince them that deceased spouses were spiritually tormenting them. He described the precise process he had used to convince elderly women to burn their husbands' belongings and transfer their pension. They were both laughing about it like it was some kind of entertaining game. That was the moment I realized I had been completely scammed by a predator in religious clothing. 2 days later, my landlord served me with an eviction notice. I found myself at the county social services office, applying for emergency housing at the local senior care facility. I had never imagined ending up in such a place, sleeping in a shared room with strangers. But my lowest point was about to become the catalyst for something I never expected. For the first time since this nightmare began, I called my son Stephen overseas and told him everything. Through tears and shame, I explained how I had trusted Pastor Danner completely and given away everything we owned. Marcus was devastated. He told him how disappointed he was in me for not reaching out to him before making such a reckless move. But immediately after the call, he sent money and promised to connect me with someone who could help. Within days, I received a call from Jonathan Pitt, an undercover crime investigator and friend of Stephen. Stephen gave him my number and told him to contact me and handle my issue. When Jonathan heard my story, he revealed something that made me feel sorry for him too. His own father had fallen victim to a similar religious scam years earlier and had taken his own life from shame. Since then, Jonathan had dedicated his career to bringing down people like Pastor Danner. Jonathan moved me into a comfortable apartment and assured me we would pursue justice together. While helping me relocate from the senior care facility, Jonathan and I encountered Miss Elith Rollin, the church secretary. Recognizing me, she asked why I hadn't been attending church services lately. Suddenly, I broke down in tears and cried out that Pastor Danner was a fraud who had stolen all my money. Miss Elith was completely stunned by my emotional breakdown. As I continued speaking, Jonathan gently interrupted and apologized to Miss Elith before we left. 2 days later, Miss Elith called me asking to meet up with us. When she tracked us down, she told Jonathan and I that she could feel that something was very wrong after my emotional breakdown 2 days back. She explained how she went through the church members' records, found my contact information, and reached out. She confessed to Jonathan and I that she had long struggled with guilt over what had been happening in the church. She admitted she knew about several financial cases that looked like fraud or religious blackmail, but she didn't know how to handle it or whom to trust. Miss Elith added that seeing me so broken made her wonder, if this were her own mother, would she stay silent? Miss Elith also revealed that Pastor Danner had once pressured her into falsifying church documents. Out of guilt, she had secretly kept copies of every fraudulent transaction and record of spiritual manipulation. She handed Jonathan a hidden USB drive containing all the evidence and told him she was ready to help put an end to Pastor Danner's evil forever. I didn't know it then, but we were about to set a trap that would expose Pastor Danner completely. Jonathan knew that exposing Pastor Danner required more than accusations. We needed irrefutable evidence caught in the very act. He reached out to Glenora Meeks, a 37-year-old sharp-minded woman from the Widows Network, who had once worked undercover in financial crime investigations. Together, they designed a trap that would appeal to Pastor Danner's greed. Here is the trap we would set for Pastor Danner. Glenora would pose as a newly wealthy widow who had recently inherited a large estate after her estranged brother's death. The plan entails that Glenora will begin attending Pastor Danner's church, always sitting in the front pew and wearing expensive jewelry, deliberately playing the role of a lonely woman desperate for belonging. After a month of regular church attendance, Glenora will now request private counseling with Pastor Danner. This is the part of the plan where she makes up a story about feeling spiritually unsafe, because her late brother was a Freemason and left her some books, rings, and symbolic items. She would claim they made her feel cursed and that strange things kept happening in her home. Unbeknownst to Pastor Danner, a hidden microcamera and audio transmitter will be placed in Glenora's expensive necklace to catch every word and every manipulation attempt in full audiovisual clarity. This was the plan. It was plain and simple. Our goal was to use the recorded evidence to build a strong case for criminal prosecution and to destroy Pastor Danner's reputation permanently. Now, before we proceed, it's very important to say that if you're enjoying this story, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. By liking, subscribing, and even leaving a short comment of where you are watching from, you are helping me grow this channel so that other people can find this video and learn the graceful wisdom tips that it offers. I share real stories from people who face tough situations just like this. These stories aren't just for entertainment. They're meant to help us learn and grow wiser. We can sometimes become vulnerable, and that's why it's so important to learn from the experiences and mistakes of others. Together, we can protect ourselves and protect each other through shared wisdom. Now, back to our story. Glenora, Jonathan and I proceeded with the plan, and Glenora started attending our church. Within 2 weeks, Pastor Denore invited Glenora to his office for a special one-on-one counseling session. During the meeting, Glenora tearfully confessed that she felt spiritually unsafe because of the Freemason artifacts her brother had left her. She claimed they made her feel cursed and haunted. Pastor Danner took the bait completely, but the conversation took an unexpected turn. Instead of asking for money immediately, Pastor Danner told Glenora that he wanted to come to her house to see those books, rings, and artifacts personally. He said he wanted to burn them himself on her behalf. This new development initially frustrated our plan, since we had expected him to request money during the office meeting. We quickly had to arrange for authentic-looking occult books and artifacts. I used my connections as a retired librarian to obtain the books we needed, while Jonathan borrowed rings and symbolic items from his contacts. We arranged everything in Glenora's home before Pastor Danner's scheduled visit. Glenora was still wearing the expensive necklace with a hidden recording device to capture any evidence of attempted extortion. But what happened next shocked all of us completely. Before Pastor Danner gathered the books and artifacts to burn them, he told Glenora that God had instructed him to cleanse her sexually. When she didn't understand what he meant, Pastor Danner started touching her in completely inappropriate places. When Glenora tried to resist his advances, Pastor Danner grabbed her aggressively and told her not to resist because it was an instruction directly from God. He said that once he had sex with her, the spirit of her late brother would stop disturbing her because of the anointing he carried as a pastor. Pastor Danner became increasingly aggressive and violent in his approach. Glenora hit his head with a coffee mug and ran out of the house to escape. In the struggle, her expensive necklace with the hidden recording device fell to the ground near her living room couch. Glenora rushed back to Jonathan and I to tell us what had happened. It was only when she arrived at ours that she realized her necklace had fallen off. Meanwhile, Pastor Danner went straight to the police station after leaving her house and reported that he had been attacked by a church member who had invited him over. Luckily, when Glenora returned to her house, she found the necklace lying beside one of the couches in the living room, and it had recorded everything that happened. When the police invited Glenora for questioning, Jonathan and I accompanied her to the station. Glenora denied Pastor Danner's accusations but didn't mention anything about having evidence to back her claim up. Instead, she simply told them she wanted the case to be settled in court. When news came out that Pastor Danner had been attacked by a church member during a home visit, he began spreading lies, even from the pulpit, claiming that the member, Glenora, had attacked him. He warned everyone not to believe anything she said. He labeled her a liar and a dangerous woman who wanted to ruin him because of the good work he was doing for God. 3 months later, during the court proceedings, the courtroom was tense, as Pastor Danner sat confidently beside his attorney, still claiming he was the innocent victim. He alleged that Glenora had lured him under false pretenses and assaulted him during a courtesy visit. Then Jonathan presented the necklace and its recorded evidence to the court. The courtroom fell completely silent as the audio-visual footage began to play. Projected clearly for everyone to see and hear, the recording captured every word, every inappropriate touch, and every manipulation attempt. Pastor Danner's voice echoed in the chamber as he claimed God had instructed him to cleanse Glenora sexually. The judge's expression hardened as gasps rippled through the courtroom. The once confident pastor was now visibly shaking in his chair. The court found Pastor Danner guilty on multiple counts, including spiritual exploitation, attempted sexual assault, and financial coercion of vulnerable adults. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison without possibility of parole, and ordered to pay full restitution to all his victims. Immediately after the proceedings, the church's board of trustees convened an emergency session. Public pressure mounted as many members demanded complete accountability for Pastor Danner's crimes. In a unanimous decision, they agreed to fully compensate me for every loss I had suffered. By the end of that week, I received a complete financial restitution package. The church paid back James's stolen pension payments, the cost of our house that I had sold, and even my care home fees. I returned to a new home, bought in my name, and stood in the living room, surrounded by familiar warmth once again. But the most important victory was knowing that Pastor Danner would never hurt another vulnerable person again. Justice had been served not just by the court, but by a community that finally opened its eyes to protect its most vulnerable members. Looking back now, I realized the most important lesson wasn't about my personal victory. It was about finding the courage to speak up when something feels wrong, even when that voice comes from someone you trust completely. Sometimes justice takes longer than we hope, but it can still arrive when good people decide to stand together against evil. My story teaches several critical lessons that could protect you or someone you love from similar predators who target vulnerable seniors. 1. Don't make major financial decisions alone while grieving. Never make major financial decisions while grieving without consulting trusted family members. Grief clouds our judgment and makes us easy targets for manipulation. Always involve your children or other trusted advisors before transferring money or selling property, regardless of who is asking. 2. Be wary of spiritual leaders demanding money during crisis. Be extremely cautious of religious leaders who ask for large donations or financial sacrifices, especially during times of personal crisis. Legitimate spiritual guidance focuses on healing and comfort, not on separating you from your life savings or precious memories. 3. Trust your gut, even against divine claims. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if the person requesting it claims divine authority. God does not require you to destroy precious memories or impoverish yourself to prove your faith or achieve spiritual healing. 4. Stay connected. Isolation makes you a target. Remember that predators often specifically target isolated elderly people who are grieving or vulnerable. Stay connected with family and friends who can provide objective perspective when you're facing difficult decisions during emotional times. Comment below and tell me what resonated most with you from my story about Pastor Danner and the importance of speaking up against abuse. Like and subscribe if you want more content that helps seniors learn from real experiences and avoid dangerous situations. Until next time, keep living with grace and purpose.